So hello and welcome to episode 87 of Driver's Seat Blog Radio. As always, I'm your host, David G. Firestone, and I want to apologize for the audio quality change after segment 3. My microphone decided it didn't want to record. I've since fixed the problem, so I apologize about that. And after last week's episode, we're going to do a shorter episode. I'm not going to mention AEW wrestling for some time. We're going to go back to racing stories, and this is only going to be a short episode this week. First, we're going to start with some things from the Chicago street races. I've been waiting for some things to play out, but some of them have. Given the totality of circumstances, I think the Chicago street race was a decent race. Now, granted, it was held in a torrential rainstorm with the Xfinity Series race being cut short by lightning, and aside from some idiot driving his Corvette around the course after hours before the race, nothing really major of incident happened. Now, as I said for the review of the race, because the race was delayed due to weather, it ended up working in my favor as my neighborhood was having their annual rib cook-off, and not even rain's going to cancel it, so I got to eat several pounds of smoked and sauced ribs, and then went home and got to watch the race in its entirety. I consider that to be a win. I did find the races themselves to be exciting, and over the course of the Cup Series race, I went from dismissing SVG as a NASCAR driver to actively rooting for him. Some fans liked the race, some fans hated it. I thought it was okay. I said that I hoped that it came back next year. And even though the race proved popular with TV fans, with NBC having their best NASCAR TV ratings since the 2007 Brickyard 400, 2.52 ratings, 4.632 million viewers, it's now come out that there may be a decent chance of it not happening. And I mentioned on several occasions that closing a huge area of downtown Chicago was not popular with the locals. Many in Chicago especially took offense to the Taste of Chicago being moved to a later date. Well, we finally have some proof that this did not go over well with the Chicago population. A survey was conducted by Alderman Brendan Riley. Now, Riley is the alderman of the 42nd Ward, which includes much of downtown and the Grant Park areas. Now, of those surveyed, there were 3 questions asked. How satisfied were you with outreach by NASCAR? Did the traffic closures associated with the event negatively impact your travels? Do you support NASCAR holding future races in Chicago? Keep in mind, Chicagoland Speedway is now open, but that's another story for another day. According to reports, in response to this survey, there were 662 negative responses to the idea of a future street race. And according to ABC7Chicago.com, link in the description, quote, traffic closures in and around the race negatively affected 50% of respondents. 34% said it didn't really had no impact on their travels. 7% were indifferent. Our respondents were mixed about how they rated NASCAR's outreach efforts. 38% were satisfied, 32% dissatisfied, 29% neutral. And about 54% said that they do not support future NASCAR races in the city. 37% said they did, and 8% were indifferent. Now, as regular listeners know, I covered many of the issues on the street race. And 2 of the biggest issues that were pretty much going to affect the future of Chicago street race were the road closures and the moving of the Taste of Chicago. Now, the road closures included the closure of Grant Park, and it also shut down the DuSable Lakeshore Drive as well as Michigan Avenue. Now, this is not a minor issue, as DuSable Lakeshore Drive and Michigan Avenue are major arteries in downtown Chicago. It's also understandable why people were upset. And I was not surprised about any of this because I've said this before. Chicago is not a major NASCAR market. Never was, never will be. And I was always of the idea that if you're going to do something like this, pick a NASCAR market. Charlotte would have been perfect. Charlotte, North Carolina is NASCAR country. NASCAR is based in Charlotte. All of the teams are based in the area. You have a huge fan base there. You would have a lot more support, and it would have been much more of a positive result. Now, I think the street race is destined for the glue factory, and I say this because between the time the race was announced and the race itself, a major political shift took place in Chicago. Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who had approved this, was clearly told about the positives and didn't focus on the negatives. Well, she was voted out, and new Mayor Brandon Johnson was coming in. And Lightfoot did not handle this well. She received a lot of justifiable flack for keeping the city council members in the dark about this before the deal was announced. Our new mayor, Brandon Johnson, has no room for bullshit, and I have a feeling that this might lead to the end of the deal. Now, there's also some things about financials and what they were going to make versus how much it actually generated. I'm still waiting on those to come out, and I'll probably talk about them at a later date. But to summarize the Chicago Street Race weekend, I liked the racing more than I thought I did. Many Chicagoans were annoyed by it. It did great numbers on NBC, and there was nothing better in the summertime than eating a rib fest, eating ribs, and drinking beer. With that, I'm taking my first break, and then I'll go on a work rant. Welcome back. I've been asked why I go on these work rants sometimes, and the truth of it is, I like to give people advice to help make the world a better place. I've come down on trends and strategies that are destined to fail or will screw you up more than they'll help you. Well, this trend will continue as I've had a couple of things independent of each other happen over the last few days, and I'm going to talk about them. I had a conversation recently with someone I know who has an employment opportunity in another state. He just left a really bad job in Illinois, and he told me this story where he had a really bad boss who didn't know anything come in and just ruin everything. Well, I had a similar experience a few years ago. Now, as we all know, when it comes to the world of business, mergers, acquisitions, and takeovers happen. Now, I've worked at my job since 2007, and our parent company has gone through this 4 separate times between then and now. The first incident was just after I started. We were bought out by a new parent company who ended up being horrible. They sold us a few years later to a much better company, and then we've had one more sale as well as another merger. So these kinds of things happen no matter what industry you're in. Well, a few years ago, as part of the last merger due to legal issues, and I'm not 100% sure if they were on the federal, state, or local levels, as part of this merger, our major competitor went under, and we weren't able to absorb many of the locations again due to the aforementioned legal issues. Well, we were the stronger of the two, so our opposing company went under. Now, the way that this was set up, the stores in question were supposed to close at the end of December that year, but not one lasted until at least the middle of December, much less the end. Now, given that our customer demand had literally doubled, we hired a bunch of former employees of the old company. And I will be referring to the company I currently refer as my company, the old company as old company. And I noticed that all of the veterans employees of the other company, the ones that we hired, not one of them lasted until February. And this was because a lot of them came in with chips on their shoulders, feeling indignant that the company they'd worked for years, sometimes decades, was now gone, and they had to work for their major competitor. Another issue that ended up being a lot more problematic, and what led to the story you're about to hear, is that many of the old employees of the old company couldn't accept the fact that they had to adapt to our way of doing things. They were used to doing things their way, now they have to do it ours. And this led to many issues on the sales floor. My department was no different, as we hired a number of their former employers. Now, the main aggressor in this story was a woman named Karen. Not her name, but a great description of her personality. She had apparently over 35 years at the old company and was a supervisor on the floor, but when she was hired by our company, she was hired merely as a cashier. Now, Karen was selfish, spoiled, and entitled, and this didn't sit well with her. She quickly became very vocal about her quote-unquote demotion, and she felt that because of her previous role and the fact that both companies were part of the same union, she should be given a higher position than she was. There were times she actually tried to act like her old supervisory position. Nobody respected her, nobody listened to her, and justifiably so. She even tried to bully people at times with no success. Our manager was a hard-ass, was a Karen in herself, but she was hard-assed. And she wasn't putting up with it. And anytime a real supervisor saw Karen's power grabbing attempts, they were immediately rebuked. We put up with this shit for 3 weeks, and that was only because we needed to staff that badly. Once the holiday demand subsided, Karen was sent packing, and we never saw or heard from her again. Now, here's the piece of advice I'm trying to impart on you. Mergers and acquisitions happen. Sometimes your old company goes under and you have to work for former competitors. I understand that it sucks, but that's just the way the world is. But remember, when it comes to you working for a company, you work for them, not the other way around. You adjust to their way of doing things, not the other way around. I don't care what you were, it's what you are that matters sometimes. It sucks, I know. Life is unfair like that, that's just the way it is. Now, while we're on the subject of unfair, I can't believe I have to discuss this again, but I had to deal with this 4 times tonight on the night that I'm recording this, and I feel the need to say this. When it comes to any business, especially retail, the posted hours will be abided by. So, for example, if a store closes at 10 p.m. and you show up at 10:01, sorry. I don't care how bad your scheduling issues are, companies are not going to accommodate your timing issues. Sometimes if you act like a reasonable person, they might make an exception, but more often than not, when the doors are locked, the store is closed. So, I saw this one earlier tonight. We had another Karen who pulled into the parking lot at 9:59 and 45 seconds when the pharmacy closes at 10 p.m. In her rush to get to the pharmacy, as Lord is my witness, she leaves the door of her car open, runs into the store full throttle, dashes to the pharmacy, only to find that the pharmacy closes at 10 p.m., not 10:01. Now, in a situation like this, you have a number of options available. You can be a mature adult and accept the fact that, well, I screwed up here, or you can do what she did, which is throws a full-on tantrum, screaming, yelling, demanding to see the manager, and gets promptly escorted from the store, screaming and crying all the way. I can understand the frustration of not picking up the prescription. Okay, I get it. But if you're going to act like a douche, the store doesn't have to care about you. Because again, stores are not putting up with this anymore. The whole Karen thing, yeah, that's exactly the reason why the customer is always right doesn't exist anymore. And if you want to talk about, oh, well, I'm going to go with your competition, good. The competition will just say the same thing. They're not putting up with this either. I don't feel any sympathy towards her because, again, your scheduling issues are not our problem. Life isn't always on your side. Waiting to the last minute is never a good idea. It's always going to end badly. I'll tell you another story. As I work in the grocery industry, my first Thanksgiving day, and that was one of the last Thanksgiving days I ever worked, I had a couple of people come in and yell at me because at 5:30 in the evening on Thanksgiving Day, there were no frozen turkeys left. And I'm like, you're lucky you found a place that's open. And guess what? Karens are going to start being held more accountable. Stores aren't going to tolerate them anymore. You will get kicked out and we won't feel bad for it. Okay. With that out of my system, we're going to do some racing news for the final segment, so I'll be right back. Okay, so I've been having technical issues recording this and the last podcast. I'm going to get a new microphone. I think this one's dead because the USB just isn't responding anymore. I think I might have fixed it, but I'm definitely upgrading. Anyway, for our final segment, I'm going to briefly discuss some NASCAR and other racing news. We're going to start with some NASCAR signings. On September 4th, it was announced that Denny Hamlin made a smart move by re-signing with Joe Gibbs Racing for a multi-year deal. Denny has raced with Joe Gibbs since 2005 and has over 600 starts and 70 wins across all three of NASCAR's top series with Gibbs. On his Actions Detrimental podcast, Hamlin said, quote, "Joe Gibbs Racing has been my home for almost 20 years now. My relationship with Joe Gibbs, my team, and everyone at JGR mean a lot to me. We have accomplished so much together over the years, and I'm really excited to finally announce this so we can all focus on chasing the championship." Gibbs and Hamlin have been racing together for almost 20 years, and Hamlin has 70 wins across all three of NASCAR's top series with Joe Gibbs Racing. While discussing this on his podcast, Hamlin also revealed that 2311 Racing will also be sticking with Toyota in the form of a contract extension. In Hamlin's own words, quote, "That was a big part of the process for sure. What this means is that 2311 will continue its racing with Toyota into the future. Nothing really changes. We're going to continue on the path that we've been on. It was my goal to make that a championship organization within 5 years. We're going to continue on that trajectory, and I think we're in a good spot. Our relationship with Joe Gibbs Racing is in a good spot. And this solidifies all those deals as done." With that, I do have to make some sad news because I have to announce Kurt Busch has retired from active driving. Now, this happened a few weeks ago, but I didn't get around to, with other things, I didn't get around to it until today. Now, he spent most of 2023 away from the track, which he claims gave him a new perspective on things. He cited gout, arthritis, and some other health issues, as well as a battle with Father Time as the reasons he left. And Busch has raced in the Cup Series since 2001 on a continual level, and he was really the last of the old-school, tough-as-nail drivers of the late 1990s and early 2000s, and even though he was very controversial, he will be missed. And our last story for this week, I'm so frustrated with the technical issues. It's going to be short. I'm sorry. I'm doing the best I can. But our final story will be Andretti Autosport, which announced that it's rebranding itself to Andretti Global. Now, this was the name of their former parent company and will bring their teams in the IndyCar Series, Indy NXT by Firestone, Formula E, Extreme E, Supercross Championship, IMSA, and Super Kappa under the Andretti Global banner. Now, I get that rebrandings are sometimes necessary, but Between you, me, and this bottle of water, I have a feeling this was done in anticipation of Andretti joining Formula One. But for all intents and purposes, that deal is dead in the water, and it isn't a factor anymore, but I wish them well. And with that, this technical, glitchy episode of Driver Seat Blog Radio comes to an end. I'm Dave Farson. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. Get my issues fixed, and I'll see you next week.